Alrighty, we are live here with Dan Lutz. Dan, how are you today?
Good. How you doing, man?
Doing good, doing well. Yeah, it's just a couple days past Thanksgiving. Did your family have a nice Thanksgiving?
We did. My wife's amazing. We had a bunch of people over. She had her mom and sister and the family over, but we also invited a few what we like to call orphans, just some friends that don't have a place, maybe aren't going home for family or don't have family. So they came over and hung out, and it was really cool. It was a special
That,
day.
that's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. Our family kind of does a similar thing. We have a bunch of people who don't have family, um, and they just kind of come over and we get to love on them, eat some nice food with them, break bread. It's always
Right,
fun.
right, right. Yeah,
That's
that's
it's really the best. Um,
nice.
that's great. Well, we're super stoked to be chatting with you. We have some people who are starting to log on here,
Okay.
and as you guys are logging on, if you have any questions for Dan, you can just post them. I'll see them below, and then we can answer your questions, chat through some things. But Dan, I was thinking we would just talk about all things bass.
Yeah.
What it's like to play on the road, what it's like for session recording, because I know you've had, gosh, I mean, 15, 16 years of experience. Like
Yeah,
how long have you been
probably.
playing?
Probably. Yeah, I mean, I moved to LA to go to Cal State Northridge when I was, I think it was 96, 95 or 96. And that was kind of really where things started, where I started playing. I was in school getting my music ed degree, but I was, gigging and playing with, some jazz quartets and around LA or, different things like that, some bar mitzvahs and weddings and parties.
Wow.
And I did them all. In fact, when I moved to LA at the time, there was it was like a swing band craze,
Really?
Big Bad Voodoo Daddy and all these. And so I was playing in a few of those, like we would go play at the Derby for all the swing dancers and stuff. And so it was a lot of upright, a lot of jazz at back in the day. But then gradually it started to move towards touring and sessions, which is kind of where I find myself today. Is either I'm on the road doing fly dates or I'm in town doing sessions and the occasional jazz gig here and there. But for the most part, yeah, I'm a little diversified these
Yeah.
days.
Is that a typical progression to go from a lot of live gigs just around town to then move into session recording?
Yeah, I feel like, most of the gigs in town, the jazz stuff is it's kind of where everybody's heart is. Like I went to school for jazz and studied jazz with at Cal Arts and got my master's in performance, but it's a labor of love. Like
Yeah.
it's really hard to support a family and make a living just playing straight ahead jazz. So I really enjoyed, kind of broadening the horizons a little bit there, and doing jazz gigs, but also doing some, pop gigs, some R&B, church stuff, recordings, folk music, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Bass lends itself to a lot of different genres, and luckily, so if you can play the electric and the upright, then you end up, diversifying kind of naturally. And so I was drawn towards jazz, but I was also drawn towards rock and the folk and all that kind of stuff. So it made it easy because I was, I liked that stuff. I didn't want to just do jazz or I didn't want to just do rock. I wanted to see what else, what else is out there for the bass and really explore the instrument through those different genres and
Yeah.
its role in each one.
Yeah, because when you get into all these different genres, I mean, you've probably worked with so many different types of artists.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, I mean, I love it. I'm certainly like not I wouldn't even say I'm a jack of all trades, but I can do a couple of different things. And I can last year I did this gig with this rock star, literally like heavy rock star from Taiwan named Shin. And I put a band together. I played on his records. They come over here and hire American musicians to play on these records, but then they go over there and they tour like stadiums in Taiwan and Hong Kong and all these cool places. And so you see this big white bald dude, like playing with these little short Korean rock stars. It's really funny. But then I'm doing like I'm right now I'm subbing in the musical Hamilton here in LA.
oh,
And
that's great.
So that's fun too. And that's a whole nother hat and another set of, skills and things for bass that Korean metal doesn't require.
Yeah, so you have to stay versed in so many different styles and just be ready to jump into different types of gigs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. And I love listening to a bunch of different things too, and always kind of just, whetting my appetite for different stuff. So it's fun. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So how did you get into this? How did you start playing bass? I mean, when did this all come about?
Well, back in fourth grade, I was born in Philadelphia, but back in like third or fourth grade, they were handing out instruments, and my dad was like, "You're a bigger kid, like you're taller than the other ones. You should take the biggest instrument, take bass." My dad was a high school choir director, and he always was kind of involved in music and shows and productions. And anytime I would go to see his high school choir perform, I was always drawn to the rhythm section that was accompanying the choir, bass, drums, and piano. And so I kind of fell in love with the bass at a young age, and I started, practicing, taking lessons kind of in third and fourth grade. And then we moved to Los Angeles when I was going into sixth grade. And in sixth grade, the jazz band at the local junior high needed a bass player. And so I started playing. I was like, I can play a little bit. And from there, I just fell in love with it. So in sixth, seventh grade, I started, and I haven't looked back. I've just been playing and pursuing. And I never even really went to school for it. I kind of just always was, I was more interested in I mean, it just kind of happened naturally. I wasn't like, I'm going to be a musician. I just kept playing and being presented opportunities, and stuff just kind of kept moving forward. So that's where it happened. And after high school, I went to North Texas, the University of North Texas, for a couple of years, and just loved it. But I watched everybody graduate from North Texas and move to LA or New York. And so I said, well, I already have family in LA. I have a place to stay. I might as well go out there and start networking and marketing and meeting people. So that's what I did. I moved back out to LA, and then moved to Cal State Northridge or Northridge in '95, and that's when really things started to roll.
Wow,
fun.
So that music scene in LA really helped you start to network and be able to connect with people and get those gigs.
It did, and for me, I needed to move up to LA. I was living in Orange County, and there's just a different scene down there. But living in LA and meeting some of the people, like one of the people that I got connected with really early on was a keyboardist named Jeff Babco. And Jeff Babco is a wonderful keyboardist in LA. He plays on the Jimmy Kimmel Show. He tours with James Taylor. He does a bunch of amazing things.
Wow.
He does everything well. And he's been one of my best friends for 20 years now. And we see each other on and off, and it's really, really fun. It's really, really fun to connect with those guys.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we just had a question come in from Luke. How do you balance playing your ideas versus playing the producers or leaders' ideas?
Luke, I'm such a fan. Thank you for posting. You did such a good job mixing my wife's single. It was amazing. So I think. Early on when I was doing sessions, I would go in and I would be scared to death because I would be around all these amazing musicians and these producers, and they'd hand you like some chicken scratch of some chart, and they would be like, here you go, you have to play this or play this idea. Sometimes they would give you like a sample to listen to, or a couple of reference tracks, and then they would say, do something like this. So early on, I was scared, and I tried to. All it was playing on in my head was, what do they want? What would be best for them? And that was a bad way to think, because ultimately it was kind of defeating what I was bringing as a musician to the table. Even though I didn't have any experience, I was still kind of sabotaging myself, thinking like, I don't know what to play. What do they want? What do they like? Who do they want? And so early on, it was like I just tried to grab at anything that they threw out. But over the years, as you know, I've gotten more comfortable in the studio, I'll listen to what the producer's ideas are. But a lot of times, I'll bring myself to the table, if you will, like a little bit of my personality in general. Because now when people call me, they generally are calling me because they want what I bring, and not just a bass player to fill the role, but me specifically. Sometimes it's not always the case, but
Yeah.
sometimes it is. So a lot of times I'll start with, I want to gather all the information. I want to talk to the producer. What are you after? What tone? What's the vibe? What are some of the references? Give me some general direction. And then I'll put all that in like a salad bowl and I'll mix it together. And then I'll put my dressing on it and flavor it. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
you're still getting like the general idea, but it's, you know, with my twist or whatever I might bring, whatever that is, good or bad. And then after a listen or two, if they're like, generally what happens is I tend to be too busy my first or second take. So I'll play like, that's cool. Just play like half as much. Oh, okay, cool. And then I'll dial it back. And generally people are happy once I stop playing so many notes.
Oh, that's so funny.
But I think it's important too. And Luke, it's a great question because it's important too. I think people need to, don't be afraid to be themselves. Like there comes a point, even as sidemen and bass players, drummers, whatever, where you don't want to just try and be a chameleon altogether and hide behind, oh, I can play that perfectly. And I feel like there's a place for your personality and style to come out. And, you know, you as an artist, that individual voice that you have, let that come out and be a part of or a flavor on, you know, things instead of always trying to just meet the, you know, what would make them happy, what would make them happy. Like, you know, I want to express myself as an artist too. And generally, if you put those two together, you get a really good track and you get some really good.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, when you're shaping your tone, now we have some people who are kind of new to playing bass. Mm-hmm. So do you have any tips for, you know, how do you shape your tone for someone who's a new bass player?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's so many. It's just like an EQ. Like I always felt the EQ on stereos would be best if it was just flat or as flat as can be. And the same thing with the tone. Like with a bass, don't try and get all the bells and whistles. Don't try and get all of the fancy electronics. Just start with like a really simple, you know, like a Fender P bass or a Fender jazz bass. Like if you start there, I think all the other basses have kind of birthed out of that. So it's good, even if that's not where you end up. If you can start with those as I was going to say baseline, but as like a, you know, a common ground, as something that kind of just a place to start from, because 90% of all the stuff you hear is going to be coming from one of those two instruments or, you know, a variation of those two, and along with synth bass and stuff. But for the actual instrument, you know, there's nothing like having just like a nice 4-string Fender, either P bass or jazz bass, to start and see, you know, where that might take you. That's a great place to start. Some people try and get like a bass that looks like furniture, or it's got this amazing wood top, or these fancy electronics that take 3 batteries and go in the back. It's like, that there's a place for that stuff, but start simple, simple, and then you can add to it later.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I mean, there must be heated debates about, you know, whether to use a pick, whether to finger pick, you know, like you know, those preferences, 4-string, 5-string.
Right.
It really just depends. Have you found any reasons to pick one over the other in what you typically do for gigs?
Yeah, well, truth is, I'm horrible with the pick. Like I never learned that. I was kind of like a jazz guy, like just fingers, you know. But there's been times now where I've been in sessions and they'll ask me to play a part, and sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. I can kind of emulate what a pick sounds like without using a pick, but it's not the same. Yeah. It's just not the same. You know, my general thought about all that stuff and music, everything is like, there's no right and wrong. Like I would say try. You know, I'm always wanting to practice with a pick because I want to be able to have that in my toolbox. Like it's a tone on the bass that sounds amazing, and when it's done really well, it's perfect for certain things. And I just don't have that up to speed. Yeah. But if I did, and I became somebody who could, you know, do that really well, then what is that? That just, you know, gives me a little bit more equity. So always trying to improve yourself. Don't, oh, I hate playing with a pick. Like, okay, cool. But you know, why? Like, really? You might hate the genre that's associated with it, but just to have that skill in and of itself is kind of cool. And how might you interpret that skill into another thing that would play a part in your voice or who you are as an artist? Like, don't limit yourself just because you don't like something and close the door to it. It's a good thing to have that and say, okay, well, I can use this here, I can use this there, or I don't have to use it at all, but at least I pushed myself enough to know how to do it. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. And so I have a quick question here. What do band relationships look like as a bass player? Do you ever have to jump through any hurdles or hoops or conflicts in sessions or gigs from being a bass player?
Wow, band conflicts. No, I mean, I think it's more, I don't think it has to do with bands as much as just people. You'll have people conflict. Within a band, in a band setting, obviously if I'm a sideman, so I don't play in too many bands on a regular basis. There are some guys that are just road dogs out on the band, out on the road and in buses and living with dudes for, months on end, literally on top of each other in bunks and that kind of stuff. I did that early on when I was in college and I loved it. But now it's, now I don't really have that band relationship. I don't really spend enough time with people where you can kind of get annoyed and bump heads and get frustrated with people. But it is, when you do go into a session, or especially like a recording session where the pressure's on and the producer and the client, they have, 8 hours of your time to get a certain amount of stuff done. And we don't really have time to just hang out and get to know each other. We have to get to work and come up with ideas quickly, work together quickly. I have to work with the drummer to, where's the feel going to be? How are you approaching this song? Like it all has to happen fast. So people skills are so important.
Yeah.
It's so important to be not only just on time and present and focused when you're in that workplace, but also just open-minded. There's nothing worse than working with a musician who is like, you present an idea, look, can we try it another way? No, that's how I hear it. Like, you're kind of done at that point. Like, if the bridge is burned and the door is closed, then how are we supposed to have? So I feel like that comes up very seldom. And sometimes, and even to be cool in that spot is like, okay, cool, I'm going to meet you where you're at. And so you don't have to worry about like, well, I'll stand my ground. It's about being adaptable and flexible. So if somebody does stand their ground and say, this is what I'm hearing, this is my part, then my job becomes, I'm going to play the best thing I can play to meet that so that we can move on and get this guy out of here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I feel like that's an important thing as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's huge in all those session recording situations.
Yeah. And most of the time you really just don't have time for it in those sessions. Like, whether it's like sometimes like a few years ago, I did Michael Bublé's record, To Be Loved, which, I think he's done a record or two since then. But that session was really interesting because it was a full big band, 4 electric guitar players tracking at the same time. Electric bass was tracking with me. I was on upright and Paul Bushnell was playing electric bass in front of me. And it was Bob Rock producing. And it was so interesting because he tracked everybody at the same time, because he wanted to have an electric bass, he wanted to have an upright bass, he wanted to hear 4 different electric guitars on this one song, along with a big band. So there was 20 brass and woodwind players there. But the time was so limited and there were so many different things. So he just put everybody in a room and he recorded us 2 times on this thing. And then he picked and chose which parts he liked. It was amazing. And it sounded incredible. I think that album won a Grammy, actually.
It should have, with how many people are on that soundstage. I mean, come on.
Right.
Oh, that must have been, that's how Michael Bublé gets his sound so large. I mean, just had 30 people play in the same room.
In this gorgeous, huge room at East West. Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing.
Wow.
But yeah, personality skills are super important in the music world.
Yeah. I wanted to move into kind of the highlights of your career. Are there any, because, I mean, you just mentioned that you worked with Michael Bublé on a record. Mm-hmm. Are there any, big highlights in your career that kind of changed the course of either how you played, who you were connected to, or anything that kind of, sits out in the forefront of your mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of my very first gigs, this is going to sound hilarious, but I just moved to LA in 95. I had mentioned I was going to Cal State Northridge, and I was living with a drummer buddy of mine, one of my best friends named John LaCroix. And John's father was Lenny LaCroix, is Lenny LaCroix. And he's a very, very famous arranger and composer in Los Angeles, for shows and Broadway and different things like that. And Lenny was the music director for Tony Danza, who was from Who's the Boss and Taxi and all this stuff. He had a live show. And so at 20 and 21, me and John LaCroix were hired to play bass and drums for Tony Danza's live show. And it was hilarious. It was just like a Vegas type show. We went to Vegas in Atlantic City and we did casinos, and he just talked about his life and sang some Broadway songs and stuff. But for me, I was making $300 a show, which was amazing money at the time, and plus per diem, which is like fake Monopoly money. And we'd go and we'd stay in these resorts and these casinos for like a week and do like a week. And I was so excited. And I was playing with these other great musicians, and Lenny is an amazing pianist and background singers, and a guitar player named Jim Fox, and amazing musicians. And that was the first like professional, like, we've got to read charts. You're going direct deposit into your bank account. Like, this is a real gig. This isn't, here's $75 cash, thanks for playing at my sister's wedding, you know?
Yeah.
So that was a big deal for me. And then from there, my next really big thing was this organist named Brian Auger, who's a very famous rock organist from England. He actually kind of pioneered jazz fusion. He played with Jimi Hendrix and Rod Stewart back in the day, and he has his own career. He's still around. I got called to do his band, where we were touring Europe for about 30 to 40 days in a row, 2 or 3 times a year. And that was amazing because just his son played drums, Karma, and we had a blast. Chris Claremont was on guitar, and we toured and just played these great clubs in Europe 2 or 3 times a year. And so I'd come back and I would do these jazz gigs, and then I would go on the road. And I learned so much about touring and what it means to schlep a Hammond B3 upstairs in the middle of Switzerland in the rain. And it was grueling and so hard, but so fun.
That's such a transition. I mean,
it is. It is a big transition. We it wasn't a super glamorous tour. I think we were making, about $1,000 a week or something, playing these jazz rock gigs in Europe in the late 90s, but it was a blast. And I met so many people, and we were on these tours where we would do festivals like in these outdoor courtyards in Italy, and we'd be opening for like Maceo Parker or Erykah Badu, or it was so eclectic over there. So I got to see so much great music being a part of this and playing and meeting so many great people. And I'm still really, really close with the Augers, and Brian, and I've played on a few records of theirs. And so that was a really big gig. That got me some really cool places. And then, getting the gig with Jonathan Butler, who is I've been with him for about 8 or 9 years, and he's a guitarist from South Africa, from Cape Town. He has a gospel career, a jazz career, an instrumental music career. I've done about 5 or 6 records with him. I've been his music director since 2010, and have a great relationship with him. And we tour and we tour the world, basically like April through November, from Cape Town to the States to Japan. We go everywhere every year and just have an absolute blast. That's been a really big gig for me. And then on the session side, about 2 years ago, in 2014, I did Melody Gardot's record. She's a jazz singer, and Larry Klein was producing it. He's a bass player and a producer. He was married to Joni Mitchell for many years and produced him. He's a Grammy winner. He's insane. And so I did this record with Melody, and then he ended up calling me to do about 7 records that following year in 2015. So I worked with him along with Vinnie Caliuta and Dean Parks and Larry Goldings and Pete Kuzma, a few other musicians. And we did like Liz Wright's record. We did Candace Springs. We did Long Long, this classical pianist guy. We did Ana Moura, who's a #1 artist in Portugal. We did her record. We did so many things, and that just changed my life when I started working with Larry. And now I just did a record with him this last year called with Thomas Dibdahl, who's an artist from, I think, Denmark. Amazing records. So that's coming out on Sony UK. So a lot of things opened up when I started working with Larry in sessions.
Yeah.
So those kind of are like the markers for me. I feel like there was always consistent work in town, doing shows and jazz gigs and church, but those were some kind of milestones for me in my career. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. We have a lot of students who kind of are in that bar mitzvah wedding phase of their life where they're still playing those gigs.
Sure.
Do you have any practical tips for people who are trying to bridge that gap, move beyond that? Because that can sometimes feel really lonely and really difficult to move to that next level.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when I look back on that time and what I was doing back then, I feel like it was so formative. The stuff I was learning on those bar mitzvahs and weddings and horrible 5-hour gigs in hotel ballrooms and stuff I was refining like my voice on the instrument. I was refining my ears, constantly learning tunes, how to improve, learning my pocket, feeling how the groove affected me, my time. The way I interacted with people, how I handled myself with leaders and singers and incredible musicians, intimidating musicians that were jerks, musicians that were supportive, like all that stuff has absolutely shaped how I deal with my professional career now. So all that to say, don't blow off that. Don't just wait for the next thing. Like, you're building stuff, you're earning, you're gaining equity in yourself, you're gaining equity in who you are as a musician. And all these things are just building blocks to get you to that next place. The other thing to consider is that those people that you're working with, maybe not in the gigs that you want to be doing, but you're playing 1 or 2 Saturdays a month or something, doing, whatever it is. You're playing with other musicians, and all those other musicians are generally in your same circle or sphere. So if you had this sphere and then they gradually, as the years go on, they get more opportunities as well. And those relationships that you have with those people, they call you. Like, there's a reason that, certain generations work with the same musicians, certain producers, because we came up together. So there's not some sort of fear of I got to get there because time's running out. Well, there's a whole bunch of people in your age and in this generation that are also moving up, not just musicians, but film composers and TV writers and tour managers. And they're all kind of getting these other opportunities. And the better you keep those relationships strong and healthy, when they get opportunity, they call you. And I've seen that so many times. Now I'm starting to do more film scoring and things like that, or film session work, because some of my friends who I came up with are now writing for film and TV. Wow. And so they're like, hey, I want to be with Dan, or I want Dan to play this session. And so that's what that time is for.
Yeah, it's incredible how
fast forward. It's to help. Yeah.
Yeah, those relationships mean so much in the long run.
Yeah.
I wanted us to cover one more thing before we wrapped up.
Yeah.
And that is playing bass in the context of church. Because you and your wife are worship leaders.
Yeah,
right?
We are we are at Expression 58 in Glendale. And she's kind of like the big boss, and I just make her look good. No, she's sort of the creative arts director, and I'm the sort of like the music director at the church. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Yeah. So you guys must have a lot of awesome people on your worship team.
So amazing.
Yeah. And so you guys have some experience on those dynamics. How do you see bass in the context of a live worship environment? Because it can be a lot different. I mean, we've been talking about session recording, going on tour, all these things that are really awesome fun, out there. And it's right up the alley with what you've been doing and what a lot of our people want to be doing. But we have a lot of people who play in the context of churches.
Right.
And so how do we take that style and tone that we develop on our own and apply it to, a worship setting?
Yeah.
Because that can sometimes be hard.
It's funny too. I always get this question, talk about worship in and first of all, like no matter what, my favorite place to play is in church. Like there's something about it that just fills me up from the inside that no other gig does. It's such a pleasure. And I've been playing in churches for 30 years, and every church is different. Some are doing like super heavy gospel, like you got to know these tunes and hear these changes, and if we modulate, you got to know where we're going and how to do that. And then some are like, we got 3 chords, and we're going to use these 3 chords for the next hour, and we're going to stay at 72 BPM, and we're just going to do builds up and down, and it's a whole nother thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's a whole nother skill set. It takes a whole different mentality. But the important thing, and where we are at Expression, we kind of are doing more along the lines of like, like the simpler worship kind of introspective. We're not doing Israel Houghton or Ty Tribbett songs necessarily. We do some sneak them in there sometimes, but it doesn't mean that one is less valuable or more special, or just because it's more intricate. I'm so thankful there's so many different styles of music, because if there was just one style and we all had to like it, then we'd be bored out of our minds. Yeah. And so I really have a problem when people are like, oh, you guys don't do enough of this, or you don't do it. It's not about that, especially when it comes to church. We're talking about worshiping and connecting and expressing ourselves. We're not talking about showing off. We're not talking about, I need to be challenged musically in order for me to execute well. Like, it doesn't work like that, at least for me. Yeah. So for you, so you kind of have to identify what the genre is or what vibe is your specific team going after. And then there's this beautiful thing that happens when you bring yourself and your gift back to God and offer that. It's like you're plugging back in. It's like you're filling up your tank. It's like you get recharged when you play, and it's, at least I do. I love that feeling. It's like I'm getting ready for the week doing it. But I don't. I can play fast runs on the bass, but if I did that during pieces or some like good father,
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And the thing about worship in particular, and honestly anything you're playing, is that you have to play for the song, and you have to play something that would make sense with the song in the moment. And as soon as you try and be fancy or play something crazy or use a weird sound that distracts from the overall, like there's a reason that you call it a band. Like, you're banded together. Your worship team is together because you're one voice. You're supposed to be unified. So if somebody starts to step out of that, where you are sonically or spiritually or even dynamically, to do something, I mean, it can be really distracting. Yeah. And so you always have to stay in a place where you're being a supportive, not bland, or, like I said, not a chameleon or not being vanilla, but you're being supportive and you're bringing strength into that whole experience, because the worship is not for you to have a soapbox to stand on. You're connecting people with their Father, and you want to try and do that with minimal distraction and maximum effort. And there's some really cool tricks that we can get into another time to sort of get different sort of emotions as you're playing the bass, and some of the tools that you can use with note choices and tones and when to play, when not to play, that can kind of enhance that experience and that worship experience. But what you want to do is err on the side of being supportive and simplistic and playing for the song and in the moment, and not being distracting.
Wow, that's so good. We may have to do a class on that sometime with you.
That'd be fun. I love that.
That would be super fun.
I was just over at this great church in Santa Monica, and we were talking about that. We had about 6 bass players and then a bass, drums, and guitar. And we rotated through the bass players, playing through a couple of different songs, trying different things to, catch moment and build energy and create intensity in songs. And it was really fun. So we should get into that.
That'd be great. We'll have to chat about that, because that would be super fun. Well, Dan, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Absolutely.
We've covered some really awesome stuff, and I'm stoked to see what we get to do in the future. And everyone's really been enjoying the bass classes that are on the school. So
Cool.
we're going to link to that below so everyone who's watching this can take a look.
Awesome.
I have one last closing question. This is a fun one. This
Okay.
is a fun question. I like to do one fun question per interview. It's, can you do the Seinfeld theme song bass line?
You know what's funny is I just watched this whole clip on I forget his name, the composer, but he would sit down. It's all key bass, synth bass stuff. And he would sit down and he would watch Jerry Seinfeld's monologues, because every scene, every show he opened with like a different monologue.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually would play slap bass fills on the piano in between the jokes that Seinfeld was, and you can YouTube it. It's so fun. You can
That's
actually
hilarious.
So he said that the theme of Seinfeld was actually different every single week, because that introduction where he's playing those slap synth bass fills over top of Seinfeld's comedy was always different.
Really? That's hilarious. So you can't play it.
I can't. Well, I mean, I can.
You can. You can.
I can
but
get
like
a little bit close, but I'm not. Yeah.
But it's always changing. So
that is an iconic question. That is an iconic. I mean, every bass player, especially in the '90s. Yeah. If you were in high school, you had to have some sort of Seinfeld like on lockdown. You had to have that at the ready. You know,
I thought that would be a classic question that every bass player has been asked once or twice or 100 times.
Yeah, so. There's so many famous, like going even further back, like the Night Court theme. It started with like a bass thing. Barney Miller was a really famous, bass intro. I think that was played by Chuck Berghofer actually. So many little cool chips. I mean, so many great Carol Kay, I think, all that chip stuff. The bass tone was so killing. So much great bass in TV. Unfortunately, Seinfeld, while it did, every non-musician was like, dude, play that. I'm like, well, that's actually a keyboard, but yeah.
I mean, whatever.
Totally.
Oh, that's great. Well, Dan, this has been super fun. Thanks so much for tuning in. We're really excited for everything you're doing out in LA. Thanks for giving us some time and just chatting about your experiences and giving us some pro tips.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Anytime.
Awesome. And we'll connect again soon. All right.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
Sounds good. See ya.
Bye.